Even though it does charge and hold energy, it does not want to start. So let's have a look into it and see why this tiny air compressor is not working anymore. The battery clearly has the correct voltage. And yeah, let's check into the battery pack, and there we have it. Some heavy corrosion is happening. So let's try to clean that up with some isopropylic alcohol. That looks pretty good. And then let's try if that helped. Gonna just solder everything back together. But yeah, unfortunately that didn't work, so I just put a tiny resistor in there and check for the voltage of the battery pack. And yeah, battery pack's voltage instantly breaks together, so there is some issues with these. So I tried charging the batteries itself with an external charger, and the batteries themselves seem to be pretty good. Also, they don't heat up while charging, so the energy is actually used to charge the battery, which is a good sign. But I was also curious about the engineering they did here to this air compressor while I had it in my hands. I was actually really surprised by the sophistication and quality of these parts. Look at that, full metal gears and roller bearings here. This is actually surprisingly solid. Look at the other part of the plunger. There is a small needle bearing in there. How cool is that? So to appreciate this little marvel of a machine, I just cleaned everything and re-greased it and put it back together. So the O-ring on the plunger down there is actually not only an O-ring, but also works like kind of a valve. So it opens in one direction, and by the downstroke it closes against the walls of the cylinder. So that's, I think, pretty smart engineering they did here. On the lower side, in that red plastic part, is the exhaust valve. So that you, when you have pressure on the system that you're trying to pump up, like the tire, the pressure is not going to escape from the system. And there was one rubber part missing, so I just cut that from a little rubber that I had lying around. Also re-grease all the gears. I then started with fully loaded batteries and a new battery management system, which is rated for 20 amps and has a 2S, so 2 cells in series connection. Same as the battery management system was before, just a new one. And reconnected everything to the battery. So you have 3 points on the BMS. So one is positive battery A, one is negative battery B, and the third point is in between both batteries. And that's where the balancing actually is happening. So the balancing does keep the batteries on the same voltage. So it's just equaling out the voltage between two cells. So I use the existing tabs on one side and then just increase the length of the other existing tab by a bit with some wire here. And then put everything back together, and you think you're good to go now. You have fully charged batteries which have a lot of capacity and a fresh BMS. And yeah, I switch it on. And you see here, the light is working. But as soon as you start the motor, bam, energy breaks down again. So what I did then is, because I thought the batteries would be a little bit weak, I just soldered some high temperature resistors to the battery pack and cycled the batteries through. So I discharged the batteries and checked for the temperature of the batteries and these resistors. So the batteries stayed at 32 and also the BMS stayed at 32 degrees Celsius, pretty cool. And the heat resistant resistors really got hot at around 250 degrees. I did that 2-3 times, recharged the batteries and saw an increase of capacity. So now the capacity of the batteries is actually really good, but it still didn't work, so I had to find a way to reduce the current of the motor while starting. So I just used an inductance of 0.8 millihenry and wired that in series to the motor, and additionally a capacitor parallel to the battery, and that did the trick. Now finally the motor is turning again. So let's now hook the air compressor back to the motor and see if the motor is now capable of driving this air compressor and if the additional load is too much for the battery. Wow, it finally works again. Finally! Okay. That was like, I think 3-4 hours of work that I put into that thing with all the iterations and trial and error, fixing the failure, and yeah, finally finding the failure. Yeah, one could argue that that is way too much time to put in such a small and cheap part. That was actually only 15 euros new. But for me that was a fun project, and I think I learned something of that, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed that project too. I then added some protective coat to the BMS to make it more moisture resistant, and put everything back together for the last time. So everything fit nice and neatly into the casing, also with the additional inductance and the capacitor. And now we're ready for a final test. I set the pressure to the max, and here you see the air compressor is now capable of delivering more than enough pressure to be used as a tire inflator. Now let's also inflate a tire as a final test. I know that sounds terrible, but I really had to speed up the video a bit. Other than that, it would take like forever. You see here, it's able to pump a tire again. So hope you enjoyed the video and see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.